Okay. That, folks, is why you always come into the room 10 minutes early, just in case you have those kinds of dramas. So I'm a few minutes late, and I'm going to try to get all of the content in for you today. I don't know what I've got going on with why my little bar's there at the top, but we'll just ignore that. I'm Chester Wisniewski. I'm Principal Research Scientist at Sophos, just around the corner. And I have to leave immediately after, because I have a flight to the UK at 5:45 this afternoon. So I would ask you, if you have a question, a quick one, please interrupt while I'm going, and I'm happy to address a question or something coming along, because I'm not going to have time to do Q&A today. If you have questions about Sophos, though, our crew will be still at our sponsor booth in the other room, and they'd be more than happy to chat with you about any of our solutions. I'm a researcher. I don't deal with the solutions as much. Obviously, I'm involved in helping develop them to some degree, but my responsibility is primarily to research the threats that are out there and to be part of our outward-facing team to share that with you and with the press and other folks that need to know things. So, yeah, that's not going to work. I'm not going to worry about that. I've got enough. I probably have to turn it on, don't I? Let's try that. Yeah, look at that. All right. There we go. So, yeah, I mean, most of my time is spent on an airplane like it's going to be this afternoon, sadly. But when I'm not doing that, my job is kind of putting together the big picture around threat stuff. And I say that because we have a lot of researchers and analysts at Sophos doing lots of different things, but a lot of that's very, very narrow work. You know, one of the guys here in Vancouver, all he does is look at ransomware all day long, and he knows more about ransomware than probably almost anybody else in the world, but he has no idea how it gets on your computer. Because you know, his job is to analyze that malware and know how it works, right? So we have a lot of people like that at Sophos, a very, very narrow vision and very, very specialized topics that are truly extraordinary people. But my team's job is to get the big picture from all the work we're doing in labs around the world so that we can try to evaluate what that means. What's the story that's really happening out there when we see all the pieces of the picture put together, and then to try to share the pertinent bits with those of you that are responsible for actually securing people's computers and building strategies for defending your businesses. So just quick stats. As of last week, we're averaging around 450,000 malicious samples come into the lab every single day. That sounds like a lot, but the honest truth is that's about 15 malware families. Almost everything is polymorphic now, so you never see the same thing twice. And as a result, you end up with these ridiculous numbers because every single copy of every type of malware you see is unique in some way, trying to evade detection. And it's the reason why there's been such a push over the last few years away from traditional antivirus and more toward what everybody's calling next generation endpoint protection. But the reason for that is we need new tactics, right? Looking at things statically is not terribly effective anymore because of this problem. And you know, technically about 3/4 of the files we ever only see once. On one computer, we'll only ever see that file one time on one PC. The truth is that number's probably closer to 90 to 95%. Again, the numbers get skewed by worms. So if you think back to things like, if you've been, depending how long you've been doing this, if you've been doing this 20 years, you might remember, say, SQL Slammer and Code Red and NIMDA. If you've been doing it 10 years, you probably remember Conficker. Of course, in the last 5 years, we had WannaCry. You take those types of things that are worms, and they create a huge amount of things that actually are the same that we see a whole bunch of, but they don't mean anything because we're all defended against them already. So the ones I'm worried about, the ones that are actually infecting customers, those are the ones I care about. And those files are about 99% we only ever see once. So the truth of the matter is everything that's dangerous out there, you're never going to see a checksum twice, which is why it's kind of laughable sometimes if you get these alerts from the different certs from different countries around the world. FBI sends out a lot of bulletins about, you know, here are the indicators of compromise, and they'll say a bunch of hashes of the file that the Iranians used to break into Saudi Aramco in the Shamoon attack, right? Nobody's ever going to see those signatures ever again, right? It's kind of silly that we're sharing checksums because we never see the same file twice because the criminals are basically hash busting, if you will. Now, this tells a different story. The marketing people who made this slide tell a different story to this than I do. I think it's meant to be a fear, uncertainty, and doubt slide to scare you about the number of vulnerabilities. But to me, it tells a couple of interesting things. There's a story behind the story, if you will. These are the number of reported vulnerabilities. This cyan color here is low criticality. The blue is medium criticality, and the orange is high criticality. And if you go back to 2003, there was this huge jump from 2003 to 2005, right? That was when criminals figured out they could monetize malware. Before that, there was no way to make money with malware. It was just demonstration stuff, worms, nuisances, annoyances, website defacements, all that kind of stuff. There was no money in crime. It was just hobbyists building malware. And once they figured out you could make money, which was penis pills in 2004, that's kind of the turning point, suddenly it was like, oh, there's money in this. So boom, more discovery, more exploits started getting discovered and reported as criminals started exploiting things in those code red days, right? And that stayed pretty level through most of the 2000s. Everything was coming in because you only really had to know how to blow up Java and Internet Explorer, and you could break into every network. And that's what they did. And then we have around 2016 here, that was kind of the advent of the real popularity of bug bounties. Bug Crowd, HackerOne, or I call them Hackeroni. But all those guys kind of really started getting popular. They existed before that, but like the popularity of bug hunting as a potential profession to make money is why we see this boost. So this boost does not correlate with crime, because this actually is good. These are good people reporting bugs to make money and finding lots and lots and lots of undiscovered bugs that were there, but not necessarily monetizing them by using them for malware. So I think that's it looks scary if you're a layman going, oh my God, look at all these flaws in software, we're getting worse. And we are getting worse to a degree with all this DevOps, quick deployment cycles, CI/CD, all this kind of stuff. To some degree, we're introducing more bugs more quickly than we used to, but we're also fixing them more quickly than we used to. So that increase is largely us fixing them, right? Not necessarily them being used for malicious purposes. And for most of you in the room, if you're looking at exploits in 2019 that would have impacted your business, there's probably about 8, right? Out of the 17,313 as of December 31st, there's 8 of those that were actually weaponized in some way that would have made it into your mailbox, attacked your firewall on the outside, whatever particular vulnerability those might have been. Very few of them are weaponized. We see 3 or 4 of them every year cause 90% of the damage. So if you're not dealing with nation-state attackers, you're largely not seeing very many of these impacting your network. But if you are dealing with nation-state attackers, it's a much scarier prospect to think about those numbers of vulnerabilities, because a lot of those are quite obscure, but they're incredibly useful, like the fix we saw last week from Microsoft, the flaw in the crypto API 2020-0601, which I've spent countless hours researching for no good reason this last week, because everybody wants to know about it, even though its usefulness is already neutered. So these are the 5 things that I saw coming into the end of 2019 that we really saw a shift in the threat landscape, things that are changing that we need to keep our eye on, that are introducing new risk to our businesses. And I'm just going to cover each one for a few minutes and give you my thoughts on how it's changing and what you might, how you might want to react to those changes, because historically it's been nation states and criminals, and that was the division. I used to put them in 3 buckets. The first bucket was hacktivists, the anonymous and lulzsec and this kind of stuff. And there's always been, pick any nation state, there's always hacktivism going on, right? Pakistanis hacking India, Indians hacking Pakistanis, Israel hacking Saudi Arabia hacking Israel. This stuff is always going on in the background, right? So that's one bucket. The motivation isn't to do anything other than to embarrass, to sabotage, to booby trap. It's not for profit. It's probably not to steal state secrets. It's just to do it. Then the second bucket was always criminality, and the criminality, while there's certainly different skill levels of criminality, there's everything from script kiddies to reasonably experienced people that could work as penetration testers and make money legitimately, although albeit less money. That line is one of the things that we really saw shifting and changing near the end of last year, and we expect to continue in 2020, which is there's no longer one bucket of criminality. There's sort of striations, lines starting to appear where unskilled groups are continuing to just do their spam and spewing out desktop ransomware and things, and that stuff's getting mopped up by anybody who's got their computer up to date. You really don't have to do much to defend against that. Windows Defender will do you just fine. And then you've kind of got this mid-skilled group, and then you've got a high-skilled group that are approaching nation-state capabilities that know they can make a lot more money by being careful and not going to prison than by just spewing out ransomware. And I'll talk about a little bit about that, because I think that's one of the most important things we need to understand now, is how these nation-state attack skills are being brought down market into the criminal world. And they've always kind of existed, those skills, somewhat there. But they weren't really monetizing them while they're using them effectively, and they are now. And that's changing the landscape for many of us when it comes to threat. To me, 2019 was the year of the supply chain attack, and I don't think this is going to change. There's just countless examples of how this keeps happening. And you could consider the Microsoft vulnerability last week in crypto API another continuation of supply chain stuff. In all likelihood, a nation state was using that in supply chain attacks And that's why the NSA chose to disclose it to Microsoft so that it would get fixed. And whether it was the NSA using it or whether it was others, that's up to the listener to determine for themselves how cynical they are. But the truth is, if they knew about that bug, it's because they were using it or someone else was using it. And that is a form of supply chain attack, very similar to the Flame attack. If you remember Flame from, I think that was around 2010, the NSA used a vulnerability in Windows Update to slip updates into Iranian computers to hack them. Kaspersky published a paper on it about 10 years ago. And a very similar thing may have been happening with this crypto API vulnerability, also known as curveball or chain of fools, if you read a lot of security press. And there's just so many examples, right? I mean, NotPetya was hijacking the auto-update mechanism of a Ukrainian accounting package that caused, I think the credible estimates are around $8 billion in damage globally. I know at Maersk and FedEx alone, it was over $1 billion just for those two companies to recover from NotPetya. And we're just seeing all different forms of it, right? At Wipro, it was people being compromised to get to Wipro's customers who they outsource a lot of their engineering resources to. In NotPetya, it was arguably a Russian test to see what would happen of compromising update supply chains and how far things would travel, and got a little out of hand. We've seen it with Facebook stuff. We've seen it with just endless. Obviously, Stuxnet arguably was a supply chain attack. We now know that a Dutch contractor snuck the malware in on a thumb drive. So sort of you could call that a malicious insider attack. We're seeing software supply chains getting compromised left and right. If you have Python coders in your organization, there's been malicious Python libraries being uploaded quite regularly to PyPy. We've seen compromise of NPM, which is the JavaScript Node.js environment. We've seen lots of compromise of public Docker containers, public AMIs on Amazon, because they know we're lazy. We need to pop a web server up for the marketing team now. They've got a campaign they want to roll out. We need to pop this thing up on Amazon. Just grab this random Linux container with a web server and hand it over. And of course, the criminals are compromising those ahead of time with malicious credentials pre-installed on them that give them backdoors, in essence, into those systems. So you've got to find your way. I mean, when we analyze spam, which is where I started in this business almost 20 years ago at Sophos, we go, well, the criminal always has to have a call to action. To make money from this, somehow you have to be able to get to them and give them money. And the opposite is true when we're talking about modern attacks. You have to have some way into the network, whether that's a bug in Flash that you exploit because you booby-trapped a website, whether it's an email with a malicious document that you ask the person to open. You have to have some way to get in. And we've had so many software vulnerabilities, back to that vulnerability chart, that's been the preferred easy way to get in. There's so many unpatched things, you just get in that way. We're doing a pretty good job of patching these days. Most of us don't have much attack surface. We only have Chrome, Windows, and a few other things. We're not using Java anymore. We're not using Flash anymore. We've tightened the ship up a little bit. We block a lot of attachments. So we're not all good at it, but we're getting so much better at it that it's not that easy for them to get in that way. So supply chains are a new way that it's easy to get in. And the one that's scariest to me is late in 2019 especially, criminals started targeting service providers because they realized they could get thousands of victims by attacking one person. They phish the tech support people at the service provider. They get one tech support person to fall for the phishing attack, get their credentials, and now they can ransom all 400 customers of that service provider because they have administration credentials from their support team. And they started hitting all kinds of random service providers. Some of them were security service providers, but other things. The most recent one in December, I remember, was they did dental software as a service for dentist offices all over North America. They hit 600 dentist offices in an hour with ransomware by phishing one tech person at the service provider. So they're realizing that's a simple, easy way to get in and make a lot of money as opposed to developing exploits. And it's hard to develop exploits. And we're getting better at patching, so they don't have the lifetime to them that they used to have when we were slow at patching, as I watch to make sure I don't miss my flight. So, mechanical watches do a purpose in life. Servers are another thing. We're terrible at protecting our server assets. When I talk to customers when I'm traveling around, and I come to these kind of events and I start asking people questions, I'm finding out that on their endpoint they have some kind of next generation protection. They've got traditional AV, they've got monitoring tools, they've got their EDRs installed, they got their CrowdStrike or our Sophos Intercept X, whatever they've got. They've got all the advanced stuff because this is where all the problems were coming in. The CEO is opening attachments and causing problems, so we need all the security focus on this stuff, right? The servers are kind of like, they have the hard outer shell. They've got the firewall and they're in the DMZ or whatever and that kind of thing. But if you can break in through into that network, they have a soft GUI center. Nothing's protected. Servers often are, if they're Windows, they may be running Windows Defender. They probably don't have your CrowdStrike installed or your Sophos Enterprise software or any of the other stuff. They probably don't have network monitoring tools installed on them. Or they're Linux, and they don't ever need to be patched because there's no bugs in Linux. And the crooks realize, like, this is a really hard target, and that is a very valuable target that's poorly defended. Well, duh. Start attacking the servers. They don't have any protection on them. You can get past most of the protection quite easily, and the information that's on them is all that's really of value. I don't give a crap about the janitor's laptop. I have $400 ransom. If I can hold the database hostage, I can get $1 million ransom. Ask LifeLock how much they paid. Oh, sorry, Life Labs. LifeLock was hacked too, so you could ask them, but I don't know if they were ransomed. And it's all about change control. And this is, marketing did not make these slides. This is me going, how do I represent change control without writing change control on the screen? So those images are Creative Commons, so I'm allowed to use them. But change control is a big reason for this, right? And we don't, a sensible approach to change control, in my opinion, is it needs to be tiered like anything else. There are some things that most organizations are not going to just. Oracle released their critical patch update last week. 334 vulnerabilities patched in one release. Nobody's going to apply something that changes 334 things to their Oracle environment. Like, just not going to happen. No one's going to do that if they have change control at all. Like, you're going to have to test that stuff. And obviously, all 334 vulnerabilities aren't in one product of Oracle's, but the point is, any given Oracle product had an average of 26 vulnerabilities in it that were fixed in that one patch, whether that's Java or their ERP solutions or their databases or their operating systems. So the problem with that, of course, is you're not going to just roll that out. That's not something that happens, especially if it's a critical part of your business, what those systems most often are. But that doesn't mean you can't patch the underlying operating system after a week of testing, right? We're seeing customers that go, yeah, we patch our Oracle twice a year after a 3-month test phase. We're like, well, that sucks, but we understand that. We have things to sell to you to help you mitigate the risk on those systems while we know they're unpatched. We'll try to help you by detecting exploitation of them, as many software products do now. However, that doesn't mean don't apply the Microsoft fix that we just talked about, the 0601 vulnerability in encryption that was disclosed last week. Like, you should be testing the underlying operating system and rolling that into your production environment once you're comfortable with it in maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like, we'd like it to be tomorrow, but that's probably unrealistic. But twice a year for the Windows ones puts you at huge risk, because very few criminals are going to target necessarily a given Oracle ERP vulnerability, but they're all going to target a given Windows vulnerability that's widely disclosed, and proof of concepts were on Twitter within an hour. You have to risk assess differently about these things. They're not one monolithic thing. The Oracle servers get it twice a year. No. The Windows software gets it on a different schedule than the security software gets on a different schedule than maybe the ERP software gets it. So you're dividing that risk up a little bit and trying to staunch the flow of blood before it's too dangerous. And I think we need to reassess how we think about change control, because it's usually it's designed to mitigate the risk of a bad patch, except what you get in turn for not patching is a guarantee that you can be hacked. So is it really worth guaranteeing to get hacked instead of patching? It just doesn't seem to add up to me. So that brings me to risk management. It's almost like I had a plan. And this is another thing I think we're terrible at. And most of us seem to focus our attention on, as I would call her, Jane Bond. Or we like to read about all these nation-state attacks, and we like the blinky boxes, and we like the cool pen testing tools. And we like all this stuff, and we love speculating about whether Iran is going to lash out at America after the assassination of Soleimani. And these are fascinating and interesting things, and it's 90% of the headlines we read about in our industry is zero-day this, and fancy bears and hidden cobras and dragons and bunnies and all kinds of stuff that are honestly just brilliant, fascinating things to talk to the people that are researching them and find out all about how they're working, right? Because it's the state of the art of what we do. But most of us aren't facing Jane Bond as an adversary. It's just not it's not reality for most of us, right? Now, what Jane Bond's doing is important, because whatever she's doing today, some criminals are going to be doing 6 months or a year from now, because they know how to steal good ideas from nation states and reuse them. But most of us are wasting our time focusing a little too much on that and not enough on the basics, and I think we all know that. I wasn't at Brian's talk this morning, but I've asked a lot of people about it, and I got the impression that he was really focusing a lot on, like, as much as these stories are fascinating, it comes back to basics, right? You got to get some of these things in a multi-factor or this or the other thing. So, and I was thinking about this because when I started working on this presentation back in December, and it was my last trip of the year, and my wife was dropping me off at YVR. And of course, as you do when you're dropping a loved one off at the airport, have a safe flight. And I literally turned to her and I just started laughing, and I'm like, there's just so many levels of absurdity in this, right? Like, the odds of you getting in a car accident on the way home from the airport are 20,000 times the likelihood I'm going to experience an issue traveling to Hong Kong this week. And 2, thank God I have nothing to do whether it's a safe flight or not. Like, completely out of my control. There's nothing I can do that will make this safer or more dangerous, pretty much in any way, shape, or form. Like, my only fear is that I'm going to only get 4 hours of sleep instead of 6 hours of sleep, and I'm going to be a mess when I get there. So, like, we're bad at assessing risk. Like, we all do this kind of stuff all the time, right? We worry about our loved ones when they leave our home in ways that we perceive risk that's wrong instead of the actual risk that something is likely to occur. And I think we do the same thing in our businesses. We're like, well, we sure know the Iranians love using wipers when they attack someone. What defenses do we have in place to prevent wipers from erasing our master boot records on all of our PCs? If you're a oil refinery in Bahrain, that's probably a real risk you should consider pretty high on your risk register. For us, that's kind of silly. That's not likely to happen, right? We need to be focusing on what is likely to happen. What were nation-state attackers doing 18 months ago that are now, those similar tactics are now being used to exploit us, to hold us for high-stakes ransom, which is what's really happening, right? And we really, we spend too much money on fancy, expensive boxes that we're happy to sell. If you want to buy some fancy, expensive boxes, our guys are at the blue Sophos booth, and I would appreciate it because that's what I get paid to come here and be able to share these things with you. But is it a good idea to buy those things, or should you be investing more in education of your staff, education of especially your IT and your security team, and figuring out who your trustworthy partners are to keep you up to date on information you need to make good business decisions, to actually measure real risk and invest where it's sensible to mitigate those risks. And we are too often forgetting the basics. And I'm not going to be the one to stand here and tell you to patch and use multi-factor and unique passwords, because you already know that. But I am the one to stand here and say we're failing at doing that well enough. And certain things, we're actually seeing how when we do it well, we force the criminals to change their tactics. And to me, that's an indicator of where the next thing is. We got so good at patching that web threats are now less than 10% of what affects our customers. We almost see very little attacks on the web anymore. It was over 80% of attacks 3 years ago. And by just getting rid of Flash and Java and getting better at patching Windows in a more timely manner, and maybe deploying EDR and some better tools, we made it hard enough. The criminals, the garden variety criminals, gave up on attacking the browser. Just went, forget it. Too expensive, too hard, not working. What works? Stolen passwords. Everybody reuses passwords. All I need is 6 years ago's LinkedIn breach, and I can use those same passwords on almost any corporate network right now and get 15% of the accounts. So I don't even have to phish you. Why bother phishing you? Just take a public password dump. Because enough will work that I'll get in. And once I'm in, I can move laterally, and once I move laterally, I can own the servers or do whatever I want. Because I know the servers, like that candy bar, have a soft GUI center. Once I breach the perimeter, I'm in, because the servers are undefended. So I only got to get one employee that I got to pop so I can get into the environment. And now I can go after the high-value asset that's also undefended. So to me, that goes, well, I'm investing my resource for the next year, and how do I get my employees to have better password practices, and how do I manage that? Is it multi-factor? Do I invest in tokens? Do I put a push app on their phone? Do I buy everybody a copy of LastPass so that they don't have an excuse for not using unique passwords? How do I enable people to do the thing I need to do? And once I do it effectively, I'll start seeing the criminals change tactics again. When they can't just steal a password to get in, what's the next thing they do? They're going to choose one of those other supply chain attacks maybe, right? But when we see the criminals change their tactics, that means we're actually effective at what we're doing. And I think we've been effective enough at patching that we've really forced their hands. We're still bad at patching servers, but we're so good at patching desktops, they've kind of moved on. It's either Office exploits or servers now. They're moving away from the browser. And I'll give credit to Google, Apple, Microsoft, Mozilla as well. The browser is so much harder to attack than it used to be. They really have done a good job, and everything kind of auto-updates now, right? Can't ignore ransomware because it hasn't gone away, but it's changed entirely in the last couple years. Desktop ransomware is dead. I mean, it exists. It just doesn't affect anybody, because mostly it's only the least skilled criminals bothering to do that, and they're using very base tactics to do it. Unfortunately, they're still hitting our vulnerable. They're hitting our elderly or less educated home PC users and things, which is unfortunate. But in the business environment, we almost see none of it these days. Any reasonably well-maintained PC is reasonably resilient to desktop ransomware. And this is just a small smattering one of the marketing people put together. I gave them a list of some of the family names we use at Sophos for ransomware, and there were literally, I think we had tracked over 500 different families over the last 6 or 7 years of desktop ransomware, and obviously based on their impact, some of them are larger than others in the word cloud there, but that was what we were facing, and that's most of those weren't successful at doing much or generating much money for anyone. They were a lot of noise and a lot of pain, a lot of destroyed data, but they weren't even making that much money, most of them. Only a few of those families were incredibly profitable. And everybody's moved into what I call automated active attacks now. And what I mean by that is they're sort of a hybrid. They're not targeted. I see a lot of people talking about targeted ransomware. There isn't really any targeted ransomware. They're not picking you because you're you. They're picking you because you're the weak member of the herd, if you will. And that started with SamSam about 2.5 years ago. We started tracking this group called SamSam that turned out to be, the US has indicted 2 Iranians. They're not affiliated with the government, they're just independent Iranian criminals. According to the US Department of Justice, which I believe they're accurate because we contributed to the investigation. But these guys kind of came out of nowhere and started doing one-offs. And that's when we started seeing a new idea emerge in ransomware, right? They'd break into a customer of ours. They'd hit maybe 3 or 4 victims a day. And the way they'd find them was just simply doing like Shodan scans and stuff. They go, right, we're going to scan for open RDP, and they'd find all the computers on the internet had remote desktop exposed, and they'd just guess some passwords automatically. And so the automation would run overnight. And then when they got up in the morning, they go, right, of the 4,000 hosts we scanned last night, we happen to have guessed passwords for 100 of them. And they take the list of 100 victims and go, oh, that one looks like they have enough revenue turnover to pay some ransom. And then they'd shift from automatic mode into manual mode. They'd manually log in with the credential that they automatically found, and then move laterally in the business and go, right, what does this company do? Oh, right, they're law offices. So if we encrypt their Documentum server, it's game over. We don't need anything else. Why even buy? I only need the CEO's laptop. I don't give a crap. If I can stop their entire business by shutting this server down, I only need to hack one server. I only got to do one thing. I just need a set of admin credentials, and I can encrypt one box. And so we saw them. They started out, it was $50,000 per victim. And then it was $100,000. Then it was $150,000. And they ended up averaging about $150,000 per victim after about a year. And they were averaging 6 victims a day, and about 3/4 of the victims that we knew about were paying. They had some flaws in their command and control mechanism, so we were able to track every single victim. So we knew who all the victims were, we knew how many were paying, that kind of stuff. We disclosed all that to the FBI just before Black Hat 2 years ago, and 2 months later, the FBI indicted these 2 guys in Iran, and then they stopped. We're not sure why. I mean, I'm sure they weren't arrested, but nonetheless, they stopped. The problem is they kind of proved a new idea, and we published a paper on it, and Krebs wrote about it, and everybody talked about, look at this. Next thing you know, like 5 new crime groups pop up copying the idea. Find a way in. Phish credentials, find the OpenRDP, take the LinkedIn password dump, whatever. Find a way in. Now we can start getting higher dollar ransoms, and that GanCrab was part of that initially, and then GanCrab kind of evolved into what we're now calling REvil. That's one of the most active groups right now doing this. They're averaging about $1.2 million US per victim. The average ransom right now is about $1 million US. So whatever country you're in, we see in the UK it's 800,000 pounds, and it almost always ends up at about the $1 million US mark on average for REvil. And anybody know what the other one is? I'm trying to remember now because I don't have my notes on the screen. I had to turn my screen off to get the screen to come up. But it's a Japanese manga character, and Death Note. Yeah, but what's the manga name? Starts with an S. Oh no, Ryuk. I don't know how to say it. Ryuk. Thank you. No, you're right. It is Ryuk. Yeah. Because the S one is the other name for REvil. That's like a Russian-sounding name, so Sobaneki or something. But yeah, Ryuk, which is a manga character, which means Death Note. Pretty good name for ransomware. but they're also averaging about $1 million per victim. So our MTR team at Sophos, we respond to 10 or 15 of these incidents a day right now, and over half the victims are paying the million. So they're raking in huge money. But it's bespoke, right? Like, it's automated. They find you because you have an unpatched Oracle, or your password was leaked or phished or whatever. But then after they identify you, the human beings come in like a professional pen test. So when you get that pen test report and you don't address the things in there, these guys are just pen testers. They're not very good pen testers. It's like they learned on YouTube. But they don't have to be very good because you're not ready for it. You're ready for automated attacks that you've been hit with for the last 15 years. You're not ready for the human behind the controls going, oh, that was detected. I'll do something else. And that's what they are able to do now, right? So you need to set tripwires and pay very close attention to them, because a human adversary will not sit idle because they got blocked like malware will. And now they've kind of moved into extortion. This was a ransom note on the screens of machines at the city of Johannesburg in South Africa back in October. This has now expanded as well. It's like no bad idea goes unrewarded. This was the first time we'd seen an extortion attack instead of ransom. You know, we stole the data. We'll publish it publicly if you don't pay us. They only wanted 4 Bitcoin. I mean, it's quite a deal. I would have paid. But anyway, they didn't pay. But that was the first time we had seen this. I was like, oh, that's novel, like, interesting. In December, all the ransomware groups, Ryuk and Revil and the other ones we're tracking, they're all doing this now. They're stealing the data before they ransom it, so that if you don't pay the ransom, they can threaten to notify GDPR, PIPEDA, CCPA in California, whatever it is, wherever it is you're doing business. If you're like, if it wasn't enough incentive to pay that we have your data locked up, just in case you have backups and you were ready for this, we'll also extort you to release the information publicly if you don't pay the ransom. And some of these extortions, we've seen $2-3 million extortion rates now. And companies are paying it. It's like do or die for a lot of them. So unfortunately, that's what to be prepared for next. And lastly, I've got a last couple minutes here. You know, we're still seeing a lot of noise and worm stuff, and worms seem to be back. Like this is the impact of WannaCry in the first 24 hours that we had seen it. It impacted over almost a 250,000 computers around the world that had not had that patch. Now, WannaCry occurred in May of 2000, I want to say 16 or 17, I don't remember. 17? People are agreeing, good. At least we're all delusional the same if I'm wrong. May of 2017, but the patch was in January of 2017. So all of these victims, went 4 months without applying that Microsoft update back to those Oracle servers and things like that, not getting patched along with the ERP software. And there seems to be, again, the disclosure from the NSA could have been, it was interesting, it wasn't wormable, but nation states seem to be very malicious actor nation states. So I don't think the Americans and the South Koreans and the UK and the Australians and the Canadians are that interested in worms, per se, as much, but certainly the North Koreans and other malicious actors are very interested in things like worms. And so we're seeing a resurgence of them, because they had gone away for a while. We hadn't really dealt with many worms, which is why it's probably come back up, right? Like, you go back to the early days, back to me thinking back to the early days of Blaster, right? And Blaster was unpatched. It was patched for 26 days before it was unleashed. And that was like prime worm time. And then worms kind of went away in the mid-2000s, and then out of nowhere, Conficker popped up, and Conficker had a huge impact. And again, it was 28 days from the fix before Conficker surfaced. And in the case of WannaCry, sorry, it was 59 days. So I guess the patch must have been in March of 2017. Between the release, yeah, I've got the dates right on the screen. I just can't see them because I'm looking at you. But we can see the impact. And largely, again, because we're unprepared. When this started happening, we started realizing, that was when Microsoft introduced Patch Tuesday. There wasn't a Patch Tuesday before SQL Slammer and Melissa and I Love You and all that stuff happening in the early 2000s. And we all started changing what we do to defend against wormable stuff. We all put firewalls in, started segmenting our networks, all that kind of stuff. And then by the end of the 2000s, we went, oh yeah, we don't need that anymore. That's a pain in the butt. An open flat network is much easier to manage. I don't need all these firewalls. Worms are a thing of the past. We stopped, and then Conficker hit, and we had to put all the firewalls back. And then we forgot again, and then WannaCry happened. And this is what's happening. I mean, FedEx and Maersk, when they got taken down with NotPetya, Literally flat global networks, flat networks in multinational companies in hundreds of countries. Shocking to think that you'd have a flat open network across the entire globe in 2019. I thought we learned these lessons people had like zone alarm on their PCs in 1995. Like I thought we'd learned this lesson, but like anything, we get out of habit because it goes away. So out of sight, out of mind, and then we stop defending against it, and then it's a vulnerability again. So we can learn from the lessons from these mistakes of the past, I think, which is not to take our eye off the ball just because we're not seeing it right now. Keep going with those good practices. Just add to them. Don't subtract them away because the problems aren't going to go away. So that's my view of the threat landscape at the moment. And my fear is that we're going to see a lot more of this extortion. We're going to see a lot more of the manually operated attack after the automated breach. And that most of us aren't prepared for that, and that's my biggest fear, is that smaller organizations, I consider enterprise, say anything over maybe 2,500 people. If you're over 2,500 people, you probably have a pretty capable security group, or you should. Under 2,500, I'm afraid, in the past, was never prepared for a human adversary, and we now have one. And if you're not prepared for that human adversary, it's going to be a painful next couple of years, because that's the current methodology that's been proven to be the moneymaker, and everybody is flocking to that business model as a crook. And in the past, it was only fancy bears and hidden cobras, and it's not anymore. So that's a very sad note to leave on, but I'm done. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please be in contact.